Some men spend their entire careers helping others understand the human mind. He was one of them, 73 years old, retired psychologist, convinced he could read people better than anyone. She was 29, a dancer from Cebu with a smile that made him forget every principle he'd ever taught. For 3 years, she told him she loved him. She showed him affection, devotion, consistency. Then he saw her phone and discovered that every single word had been a performance. I was sitting in the garden of our rented villa in Cebu when Delilah brought me my morning tea. The sun was just coming up over the palm trees, and she set the cup down on the table beside me with that gentle smile I'd come to rely on. "Good morning, my love," she said softly, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Did you sleep well?" I reached up and touched her hand. "Better with you here." She settled into the chair across from me, tucking her legs beneath her in that graceful way dancers have. Even in the morning, wearing just a simple sundress, she moved like she was performing. I'd always found it mesmerizing. "I was thinking," she said, stirring her own tea, "maybe today we go to the beach? Just the two of us. No distractions." I smiled. That sounds perfect. This was my life now. 3 years into retirement, living in the Philippines with a woman who made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in decades. My colleagues back in London probably thought I'd lost my mind, a 73-year-old psychologist running off to Southeast Asia with a dancer half his age. But they didn't know Delilah. They didn't see what I saw. Or at least, what I thought I saw. I'd spent 45 years analyzing human behavior, teaching others how to recognize deception, building a career on understanding the subtleties of emotional manipulation. I'd written papers on it, lectured about it, helped countless patients recognize when they were being used, and I'd missed every single sign with her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to how this all started, because that context matters. It explains why I was so willing to believe, why I ignored things that should have been obvious. I met Delilah 3 years ago, about 6 months after I retired from my practice in London. My wife had passed away 4 years before that, after a long battle with cancer. We'd been married for 42 years. Losing her broke something in me that I didn't know how to fix. I threw myself into work for those first few years after her death, saw more patients, took on more lectures, filled every hour so I wouldn't have to sit alone in our house and feel the emptiness. But when I finally retired at 70, the silence became unbearable. My daughter Sarah suggested I travel. "Dad, you've spent your entire life helping other people. Maybe it's time to do something for yourself." I wasn't sure what that meant, exactly, but I'd always been fascinated by Southeast Asia. I'd read about it, seen documentaries, but never had the time to visit. So I booked a 3-month trip: Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. I met Delilah on my second week in Cebu. I'd gone to a cultural show at one of the resorts, traditional Filipino dances, music, the whole tourist experience. She was one of the dancers, 26 at the time, with long dark hair and this incredibly expressive face. When she danced, you couldn't look away. After the show, she approached me at the bar. That should have been my first clue, I suppose. But I told myself she was just being friendly, that Filipinos were known for their hospitality. "Did you enjoy the performance?" she asked, settling onto the bar stool beside me. "Very much," I said. "You're quite talented." She smiled, and it lit up her whole face. "Thank you. I love dancing. I've been doing it since I was a little girl." We talked for hours that night. She asked about my life in London, my career, my family. She seemed genuinely interested in everything I said. When I mentioned I was widowed, she reached over and touched my hand. "I'm so sorry," she said. "That must be very difficult." There was something in her eyes that made me believe she truly understood, a depth of emotion that felt authentic. I saw her again the next night, and the night after that. By the end of the week, we were spending every day together. She showed me parts of Cebu that tourists never saw, introduced me to her friends, took me to her family's home for dinner. Her mother was warm and welcoming. Her younger siblings were polite and curious about the foreigner their sister had brought home. It all felt so genuine, so real. "Delilah talks about you all the time," her mother said to me in careful English. "She says you make her very happy." 3 weeks into knowing her, Delilah told me she was falling in love with me. We were sitting on the beach at sunset, and she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I know this is crazy. I know we just met, but I can't help how I feel. You're different from anyone I've ever known." I should have been skeptical. A trained psychologist would have recognized all the classic signs of too much, too soon. But I didn't want to be skeptical. I'd been alone for so long. And here was this beautiful, vibrant woman telling me she loved me. "I feel the same way," I told her, and I meant it. When my 3-month trip was supposed to end, I couldn't imagine leaving her. So I didn't. I extended my stay, then extended it again. Eventually, I just stopped booking return flights. I rented a villa in a nice neighborhood in Cebu. Delilah moved in with me. I told myself I was starting a new chapter of my life. My daughter Sarah wasn't thrilled about it. "Dad, I'm worried about you," she said during one of our video calls. "You barely know this woman." "I know her better than you think," I said. "And I know myself. I'm not some foolish old man being taken advantage of." Famous last words. For the first year, everything seemed perfect. Delilah was affectionate, attentive, devoted. She'd wake up early to make my breakfast. She'd plan our days around my preferences. She'd curl up beside me in the evenings and tell me how grateful she was that I'd come into her life. "You saved me," she said one night, her head resting on my chest. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, working, dancing, trying to help my family. But I wasn't really living. You made me realize what it feels like to actually be happy." I believed every word. The money started gradually. It wasn't like she asked for huge sums right away. First, it was small things. Her mother needed help with medical bills. Her brother's school fees were due. The dance studio where she worked wasn't paying consistently. I was happy to help. That's what you do for the people you love, right? You support them. And I had the money. I'd built a successful practice over 4 decades. My pension was solid. My investments were sound. A few £1,000s here and there wasn't going to hurt me. But it wasn't just a few thousand. Looking back now, I can trace exactly how it escalated. 6 months in, Delilah's mother needed surgery. £8,000. 8 months in, her family's house needed major repairs, £12,000. A year in, her younger sister wanted to go to university in Manila, 4 years of tuition and living expenses, £40,000. Then there were the business investments. Delilah had dreams of opening her own dance studio. She showed me detailed plans, talked about how she could provide jobs for local dancers, create something meaningful. I gave her £50,000 to get started. The studio never materialized. There was always some delay, some unexpected obstacle. But she was trying, I told myself. These things take time. Her cousin needed help starting a small restaurant. £15,000. Her brother wanted to buy a motorcycle for work. £3,000. Her aunt's house was being foreclosed. £20,000. Every request came with tears, with explanations, with promises that this would be the last time, that she hated asking, that she felt terrible about it. And every time, I reassured her. "Delilah, I want to help your family," I'd say. "They're important to you, so they're important to me." She'd throw her arms around me. "You're the most generous man I've ever known. I love you so much." By the end of the second year, I'd given her over £250,000. That's roughly $320,000 in US currency. I kept detailed records, not because I doubted her, but because I was trained to be methodical. I wanted to know where the money was going, wanted to make sure I was being responsible. When I looked at the spreadsheet I'd created, I felt a small flutter of concern. That was a lot of money. But then I'd remind myself that I could afford it, that Delilah had never given me any reason not to trust her. that this was just what relationships looked like when there was an economic disparity. My daughter noticed, of course. I'd mentioned some of the support I was providing, thinking she'd understand. "Dad, that's insane," Sarah said, her voice sharp over the video call. "You can't just throw money at her family like that." "I'm not throwing it away," I said calmly. "I'm helping people who need it. There's a difference. Have you even met most of these people? Do you know if these emergencies are real?" "Of course they're real. And yes, I've met them. Delilah's not lying to me, Sarah." She was quiet for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, "Dad, I know you're lonely. I know you miss Mom, but this doesn't feel right." "I appreciate your concern," I said, my tone making it clear the conversation was over. "But I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." After we hung up, Delilah came into the room. "Is everything okay? You look upset." "Just Sarah being overprotective," I said. Delilah sat down beside me, taking my hand. "She doesn't understand us. She doesn't see what we have." "No," I agreed. "She doesn't." The third year was when things really accelerated. Delilah's requests became more frequent, more urgent. Her father got sick and needed expensive treatments, £35,000. Her brother was in a car accident and needed surgery, £18,000. The family wanted to buy a piece of land to build a new house, £75,000. I started to feel the strain. Not financially, exactly. I still had enough. But emotionally, I was beginning to wonder if there would ever be a time when her family didn't need help. "I feel like all we talk about anymore is money," I said to her one evening after she'd mentioned another problem with her sister's university expenses. Delilah's eyes filled with tears immediately. "I'm so sorry. I hate this. I hate that my family has so many problems. I wish I didn't have to ask you for anything." She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "Maybe I should just leave. You'd be happier without all this burden." I got up and pulled her into my arms. "No, don't say that. I didn't mean it like that. I just feel so guilty," she sobbed into my chest. "You've done so much for us, and I know it's not fair to you. Delilah, I love you. I want to help. I'm just tired, that's all." She looked up at me with those tear-filled eyes. "I love you too, so much. You're everything to me." And I believed her. Even with the doubts starting to creep in, I believed her. Looking back now, I can see exactly what she was doing. Every time I expressed the slightest hesitation, she'd cry. She'd threaten to leave. She'd turn it around so that I was comforting her, reassuring her, promising that everything was fine. It's called emotional manipulation. I'd written about it, taught others to recognize it, explained to countless patients how abusers use guilt and fear to maintain control. But when you're in it, when you're the one being manipulated, all that professional knowledge means nothing. You don't see it. You can't see it. Because seeing it would mean admitting that the person you love has been lying to you from the beginning. By month 34 of our relationship, I'd given Delilah £400,000. That's over $500,000. My savings were starting to look thin. My investments were being liquidated faster than I'd planned. For the first time, I began to worry about my own financial future. I sat her down one evening and tried to have a serious conversation. "Delilah, we need to talk about the money situation." She tensed immediately. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've given your family a substantial amount of support over the past 3 years, and I'm happy I could help, but I need to start being more careful about my own finances." Her face crumpled. "Are you saying you won't help my family anymore?" "I'm saying we need to be more selective. We can't say yes to every request." She stood up, pacing the room. "This is because of your daughter, isn't it? She's been poisoning you against me. This has nothing to do with Sarah. She hates me. She thinks I'm just using you. Delilah, please. This isn't about anyone else. It's about being responsible." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression shifting to something softer, more vulnerable. "Do you still love me?" "Of course I do." "Then why does it feel like you're pulling away from me?" She came over and knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in hers. Cyril, I know my family has a lot of problems. I know it's been hard on you, but they're all I have. Before you came along, I was their only hope. I was dancing 6 nights a week, sending them every peso I could spare, and it still wasn't enough. Tears rolled down her cheeks. When I met you, it was like a miracle. Finally, someone who could actually help them, who could make their lives better. And you did. You've changed everything for them. I'm glad I could help, I said quietly. But it's not just about the money, she continued. It's about you. It's about us. You made me believe in love again. You made me feel cherished and safe. I'd give all of that up if it meant keeping you. She pressed her face against my hands. Please don't stop loving me. I couldn't bear it. How do you argue with that? How do you maintain boundaries when someone is telling you that you're their entire world? You don't. You just keep giving. Over the next 6 months, I gave her another 120,000 pounds. The requests kept coming, and I kept saying yes. Part of me knew this couldn't continue forever. But another part of me was terrified of what would happen if I said no. Would she leave? Would I end up alone again, back in that suffocating silence I'd felt after my wife died? The fear of losing her was stronger than any rational concern about money. I was now at 520,000 pounds total. Over $660,000 US. More than half my life savings poured into a relationship with a woman I'd known for 3 years. My daughter had stopped talking to me. She'd made one last attempt to reason with me about 6 months prior, and when I'd refused to listen, she told me she couldn't watch me destroy yourself anymore. When you finally wake up and see what she's doing to you, I'll be here, Sarah had said. But until then, I can't be part of this. I told myself she'd understand eventually, that once she saw how happy Delilah made me, she'd accept it. I'd isolated myself from most of my old friends too. They'd made their disapproval clear in subtle and not so subtle ways, stopped inviting me to things, made comments about these situations when they did see me. Eventually, I just stopped reaching out. Delilah became my entire world, and I told myself that was beautiful, that kind of all-consuming love. But it wasn't love. It was dependency, and I was too blind to see the difference. 3 years and 2 months after I met her, everything fell apart in the most mundane way possible. Delilah had gone out to meet some friends for lunch. She'd left her phone on the kitchen counter, plugged into charge. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I had no reason to be. I was making myself a cup of tea when her phone buzzed. A message notification lit up the screen. I glanced at it automatically, the way you do when a phone makes a noise near you. The message was in Tagalog, but I'd picked up enough over the past 3 years to understand some of it. What caught my attention was the name, Rico. She'd mentioned a Rico before, said he was a cousin or a family friend. I couldn't quite remember. But the preview of the message didn't sound like something you'd send to a cousin. I miss you too, baby. When can I see you again? I stared at the phone. My hands had gone cold. It's nothing, I told myself. It's probably innocent. Maybe they're just close friends. But my heart was pounding. And before I could stop myself, before I could think about privacy or trust or any of the principles I'd built my life around, I picked up her phone. It wasn't locked. She never locked it around me. Why would she? I'd never given her any reason to think I'd look. I opened the messaging app. The conversation with Rico went back months, hundreds of messages. I scrolled up, my hands shaking, and started reading. Can't wait to see you tonight. I hate pretending we're not together. The old man gave me money for my brother's surgery, LOL. Dinner on me. He's so gullible. I almost feel bad. Almost. I sat down heavily in a kitchen chair. The phone felt like it was burning in my hand, but I couldn't put it down. I kept scrolling. There were photos. Delilah and Rico together, intimate, clearly a couple, dated from throughout our entire relationship. There were messages about me, about how she couldn't stand my touch, how she had to force herself to be affectionate, how she counted down the hours until she could get away and see him. I told him I loved him today. I thought I was going to vomit, lol, but he ate it up. transferred another 50K. My vision was blurring. I couldn't tell if it was from tears or shock. I kept reading. There were more conversations. Other men. Not just Rico. At least 3 others that I could find in just a few minutes of scrolling. Different levels of involvement, but the same basic pattern. She told them she was just using me for money. She mocked my age, my appearance, my accent. She joked about how easy I was to manipulate. In a group chat with her friends, someone had asked her, "Do you feel bad at all?" Her response, "Why would I? He's a rich foreigner who came here looking for a young girlfriend. He knows what this is. If he's too stupid to see it, that's his problem. I'm just playing the game." Another friend, "But you've been with him for like 3 years. That's a long time to fake it." Delilah, "Yeah, but look at what I've got from it. My family has a new house. My siblings are in school. I have savings. 3 years of pretending to love an old man? Worth it." I don't know how long I sat there reading. It might have been 20 minutes. It might have been an hour. Time had stopped meaning anything. Every message was another knife. Every joke at my expense. Every casual dismissal of what I thought we had. Every calculation about how much more she could get from me before she left. There were discussions about exit strategies, about how much longer she should stay, whether she should ask for one more big transfer before breaking up with me. Rico had written, "Just get him to buy you a condo, then we can live there after you dump him." She'd responded, "Good idea. I'll work on it. He's already feeling guilty about setting boundaries on money. Easy target." I finally put the phone down. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. Everything was a lie. Every single moment of the past 3 years. Every "I love you," every tender touch, every tear she'd cried when talking about how much I meant to her. All of it, completely fabricated. She'd never loved me. She'd barely even liked me. I was a mark. A retirement fund. A stupid old man who'd confused loneliness with love and paid £520,000 for the privilege of being lied to. I sat in that kitchen for I don't know how long, staring at nothing. My mind was spinning but also completely blank. I couldn't process what I'd just learned. It was too big, too devastating. Every memory I had of us was now contaminated. When she'd told me she loved me that first time on the beach, performance. When she'd introduced me to her family, calculated. When she'd cried and told me I'd saved her, manipulation. None of it was real. None of it had ever been real. I heard the front door open. Delilah's voice called out, "I'm back. Did you miss me?" She walked into the kitchen, all smiles, and stopped when she saw my face. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I couldn't speak. I just looked at her. This woman I thought I knew. This stranger who'd been lying to me for 3 years. "Cyril, you're scaring me. What happened?" I picked up her phone and slid it across the table toward her. She glanced at it, then back at me. Still confused. Still playing the part. "I read your messages," I said quietly. The blood drained from her face. For just a second, the mask slipped, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, just cold calculation. Then she recovered. The tears started immediately. "Oh God. Cyril, I can explain." "Don't." My voice came out harder than I expected. "Don't insult me by lying anymore. It's not what you think." I read everything, Delilah, every message, every joke about me, every conversation about how much more you could take before leaving. She was crying harder now, but I noticed it differently than I had before. The tears were real, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. She was losing control of the situation. "I do love you," she said desperately. "Those messages, they were just, I was venting. I was frustrated, but it doesn't mean I don't care about you." I stood up. "Stop. Just stop. Please, Cyril, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You've been using me from the beginning. You never loved me. You told your friends you found me repulsive. You were planning your exit strategy." She changed tactics. The tears stopped abruptly. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I was with you for the money. What did you expect? You're 73 years old. Did you really think a 26-year-old woman would fall in love with you for your personality? The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But they were also clarifying. I came to this country looking for a young girlfriend who'd pretend to love me for money, I asked. Is that really what you think? That's what all of you think, she shot back. All you foreign men who come here thinking you can buy a beautiful young wife. You know exactly what you're doing. I came here as a tourist. I met you by chance. I fell in love with what I thought was a genuine connection. She laughed bitterly. There's no such thing as a genuine connection between a rich 70-year-old foreigner and a poor Filipina dancer. It's always transactional. You were just too stupid to see it. So it's my fault for believing you when you said you loved me. It's your fault for being naive enough to believe that this was ever anything but business. I stared at her. This person was a complete stranger. I'd never seen this version of her before. Cold, contemptuous, honest, finally, in the cruelest possible way. How much of it was true? I asked. Your mother's surgery, your sister's university, your brother's accident. Any of it? She shrugged. Some of it. Not all of it. Does it matter? Yes, I said quietly. It matters. My family needed help. You had money. It's not complicated. And Rico? The others? What about them? Were you with them the whole time? Of course. Did you really think I was going to be celibate for 3 years while I played house with you? Each answer was another cut, but I kept asking. I needed to know, needed to understand the full scope of the deception. Why me? I finally asked. Out of all the foreigners in Cebu, why did you choose me? For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed her face. Because you were kind, because you seemed lonely. Because when I talked to you that first night, I knew you'd be easy to manipulate. She said it like it was obvious, like I should have known. You targeted me. I saw an opportunity. Don't make it sound so calculated. You wanted a girlfriend. I needed money. We both got what we wanted. I wanted love, I said. That's not what I got. You got companionship. You got someone who made you feel young again. You got 3 years of feeling like you mattered to someone. That's worth something. It was all fake. So what? It made you happy, didn't it? Until today you were perfectly content. She was right about that. The happiness had been real, even if the foundation for it was completely false. I want you out, I said. Her expression hardened. This is my home too. Your name isn't on the lease. You have no legal right to be here. After everything you promised me, everything you gave my family, I didn't give your family anything. I gave money to you, based on lies. I want you out. Today. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. Fine. I was getting bored anyway. She walked past me toward the bedroom. I heard her pulling out suitcases, throwing things around. I stood in the kitchen, numb. 20 minutes later, she came back out, carrying 2 large suitcases. She changed into going out clothes, fixed her makeup. She looked like she was heading to a party, not leaving a 3-year relationship. She stopped at the door and looked back at me. For what it's worth, she said, you were nicer than most of them. I almost felt bad sometimes. Almost, I repeated. Yeah, almost. And then she was gone. I stood there in the empty villa, listening to the silence. It felt familiar, like coming home to the house after my wife died, that same crushing, suffocating emptiness. Except this time, I'd paid £520,000 for it. The next few days were a blur. I canceled the credit cards I'd given her, changed the locks on the villa, sat down with my bank statements and tried to compile a complete picture of the financial damage. £520,000. Over $660,000 US. More than half my life savings gone. I called Sarah. It was the middle of the night in London, but she answered on the second ring. Dad, what's wrong? I told her everything. The messages, the other men, the lies, The money? She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "I'm so sorry," she finally said. "I'm so sorry. You tried to warn me. That doesn't make this any easier. I've been such a fool. You were in love. That's not the same thing as being a fool." But it felt the same. It felt worse, actually, because I was supposed to know better. I'd spent my entire career studying human behavior. I'd helped hundreds of people recognize toxic relationships. I'd taught workshops on manipulation and deception, and I'd fallen for the most obvious scam imaginable. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Come home, I suppose. There's nothing for me here. You're always welcome home, Dad. You know that." After we hung up, I sat in the dark villa and thought about the past 3 years. I'd convinced myself that I was building a new life, that I'd found happiness after loss. That age didn't matter when you had a real connection with someone. But there was never a connection. There was just a lonely old man and a young woman who saw an opportunity. The worst part wasn't the money. I mean, it was a devastating amount to lose. It would affect my retirement, force me to live more modestly than I'd planned, but I could survive it. The worst part was the betrayal of trust. The knowledge that every moment of affection had been calculated. Every "I love you" had been a performance. Every tear, every smile, every intimate moment we'd shared, all of it was fake. She'd hated me, found me repulsive, counted down the hours until she could get away from me. And I'd had no idea. I'd looked into her eyes and seen love. I'd felt her touch and believed it meant something. I'd listened to her words and trusted them completely. How do you come back from that kind of deception? I spent a week barely leaving the villa. I'd go through phases of rage, where I'd imagine confronting her again, saying all the things I hadn't said. Then I'd crash into despair, replaying every moment of our relationship and seeing it through the lens of truth instead of illusion. I thought about reporting her to the police. But for what? She hadn't technically stolen from me. I'd given her the money voluntarily. The fact that it was based on lies didn't make it fraud in a legal sense. I thought about trying to get some of it back, but I knew that was pointless. The money was long gone, distributed to her family, spent on her boyfriend, saved for her future after she left me. I thought about revenge, but what would that even look like? Exposing her on social media? Confronting her family? What would it accomplish except making me look even more pathetic? In the end, I did nothing, just sat with the pain and waited for it to become bearable. My daughter called every day. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out after Sarah must have told them what happened. They were kind, but I could hear the unspoken "I told you so" in their voices. I'd ignored every warning sign, every piece of advice, every expression of concern. I'd chosen to believe the lie because the truth was too lonely. 2 weeks after Delilah left, I was packing up the villa, preparing to return to London. I found a photo album she'd made for our 1-year anniversary. It was full of pictures of us together, smiling, holding hands, looking happy. I studied the photos, trying to see the truth in them, trying to spot the deception in her expression. But I couldn't. She looked genuinely happy, genuinely in love. That was the most disturbing part. She was that good at pretending. Every photo, every moment captured it all looked real. I threw the album in the trash. On my last night in the villa, I sat out in the garden where Delilah had brought me tea that morning 3 weeks ago, the morning before everything fell apart. I thought about what she'd said, that I'd gotten what I wanted, companionship, someone who made me feel young, 3 years of feeling like I mattered. Was that worth £520,000? No, of course not. But more than that, I hadn't gotten what I wanted. I'd wanted love, real love, the kind I'd had with my wife, where you see each other's flaws and choose each other anyway. What I'd gotten was a transaction dressed up as love, a performance that I'd paid for without realizing I was an audience member instead of a participant. I'd spent 45 years helping people understand themselves, helping them recognize when they were being manipulated or used, helping them build healthy relationships based on honesty, and mutual respect. And when it came to my own life, I'd ignored every principle I'd ever taught. The irony wasn't lost on me. I flew back to London 3 days later. Sarah picked me up from the airport. She hugged me tightly and didn't ask any questions. Over the next few months, I slowly rebuilt my life, reconnected with old friends, started seeing a therapist myself, which felt strange after being on the other side of that relationship for so long. I had to adjust my retirement plans. The financial hit was significant. I couldn't afford to live as comfortably as I'd planned. I had to be more careful about expenses. But I survived. Financially, at least. Emotionally was harder. I kept replaying moments from our relationship, seeing them through the new lens of truth. Every time she told me she loved me, I now knew she was lying. Every time she'd cried and said I was the best thing that ever happened to her, she was manipulating me. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. I genuinely loved her. That was the painful truth I had to sit with. My feelings were real, even if hers never were. And that made it worse, somehow, because I couldn't even look back on the relationship with pure anger or disgust. There was still a part of me that remembered how happy I'd felt, how alive, how valued. Even knowing it was all fake, I missed the feeling of being loved. 6 months after I returned to London, I got a message on Facebook from someone I didn't know, a man named Rico. My hands shook as I opened it. "I thought you should know," the message read. "Delilah is engaged to a British man she met 2 months ago. He's 75, works in finance. She's using the same playbook she used on you. I thought maybe you'd want to warn him." He included a link to her Facebook page. I looked at the photos. Delilah and this new man, looking happy, looking in love. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reach out to him, to warn him, to save him from the same fate I'd suffered. But I knew he wouldn't listen. I wouldn't have listened if someone had warned me. When you're lonely and someone makes you feel loved, you don't want to hear that it's fake. You want to believe. I deleted the message and blocked Rico. It wasn't my responsibility to save everyone. I couldn't even save myself. A year after everything fell apart, I was having dinner with Sarah. We'd grown close again. She'd forgiven me for pulling away, and I'd forgiven myself for being so blind. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The whole thing, the 3 years with her." I thought about it, really thought about it. "I regret the money," I said. "I regret the lies. I regret how it ended. But I don't regret trying. I was lonely. I was looking for connection. I just found it in the wrong place." "You're not going to try again? Dating, I mean." I laughed. "I don't think I'm cut out for it. Dad, not everyone is like her." "I know, but I also know that I'm 74 years old. I'm not wealthy anymore. I'm not particularly interesting. The pool of women who genuinely want to be with me is pretty small. You're selling yourself short." "I'm being realistic, and honestly, I'm okay with it. I'd rather be alone than go through that again." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry she did that to you." "Me too." Now, at 74, I've accepted what happened. I lost £520,000 and 3 years of my life to a lie. But I also learned something about myself. I learned that even smart people, even trained psychologists, can be manipulated when they're vulnerable. That loneliness makes you ignore red flags. That wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. I learned that love requires more than just feeling. It requires evidence, consistency, trustworthiness, and I'd had none of those things with Delilah. I also learned that I could survive heartbreak. Again, even at my age, even after everything. The money is gone. I'll never get it back. I've had to adjust my lifestyle, cut back on expenses, accept that retirement won't look the way I planned. But I'm still here, still functioning, still capable of finding meaning in my life, even without romantic love. Sometimes I think about Delilah, wonder if she's still with that new man Rico told me about, wonder if she ever thinks about me, or if I was just one in a long line of marks. I wonder if she ever felt anything real for me, even for a moment. But then I remind myself that it doesn't matter. Wondering about it doesn't change anything. She lied. I believed. I paid. It's over. The only thing I can control now is how I move forward. I volunteer at a community center now, help run a support group for older adults dealing with loneliness and isolation. It's strange being on both sides of that dynamic, the trained professional and the person who lived through it. But it helps. Talking about it, hearing other people's stories, realizing that I wasn't uniquely foolish, that this happens to people all the time. One of the men in my group told me his story recently. He'd met a woman online, fell in love, sent her thousands of pounds before realizing she wasn't who she said she was. "I feel so stupid," he said, his voice breaking. "How did I not see it?" I understood exactly how he felt. "You wanted to believe," I told him. "That's not stupid. That's human. But I should have known better." "So should I. But we didn't. And now we do." He looked at me. "Does it get easier?" "Yes," I said, slowly, "but yes." And it has. The sharp pain has dulled to a manageable ache. I don't think about her every day anymore. I don't replay the lies in my head constantly. I've forgiven myself for being deceived. That was the hardest part. Accepting that I didn't fail because I was stupid or weak. I failed because I was human. I wanted love. I thought I found it. I was wrong. That's the whole story. 520,000 pounds, 3 years, hundreds of lies, and one very painful lesson about the difference between what we want to believe and what's actually true. I spent my career teaching others to see that difference, to recognize manipulation, to protect themselves from deception. And when it mattered most, I couldn't see it in my own life. Maybe that's the cruelest irony of all. But I survived it. I'm still here. And I'm finally, slowly, learning to be okay with being alone. Because being alone is better than being lied to. Even if it took 520,000 pounds to learn that lesson,